Hey everyone, tonight we're diving into something that'll make you grateful for autocorrect and keyboards. We're exploring the brutal, beautiful, and absolutely unforgiving history of handwriting, from ancient scribes desperately scratching sheep inventories into clay tablets to Renaissance masters who could make the alphabet look like it belonged in an art gallery. So before we begin this journey of cramped fingers and ink-stained souls, go ahead and hit that like button if you enjoy these deep dives into humanity's strangest struggles. And let me know in the comments what your handwriting looks like. Be honest, does it resemble elegant calligraphy or the frantic scribbles of someone taking notes during an earthquake? Now settle in. Maybe grab a pen just to appreciate how easy you have it. And let's explore the magnificent obsession that turned simple mark making into one of civilization's most important and torturous arts. So, you think you could have been a medieval scribe? Charming. Really? Like someone who's never held a quill pen, thinking they could illuminate manuscripts by candlelight for 12 hours a day without going slightly mad. Picture this. You're a Sumerian scribe, circa 3200 BCE, and your boss just handed you a lump of wet clay and a pointy stick. Make this meaningful, he says, gesturing vaguely at some sheep that need counting. You don't know it yet, but you're about to accidentally invent the most enduring form of human torture known to civilization handwriting. And unlike Rome, which at least had the decency to promise glory before crushing your soul, writing offered no such comfort. Just blisters, ink stains, and the eternal judgment of every teacher who would ever exist. The Sumerians didn't wake up one morning and decide to revolutionize human communication. They had a more pressing problem: how to keep track of who owed whom how many goats without relying on memory, which, as anyone who's ever forgotten where they put their keys knows, is about as reliable as a chocolate teapot. So they grabbed some clay, fashioned it into tablets, and started making marks. Not pretty marks, mind you. These weren't the elegant swooshes you see in calligraphy books. These were desperate scratches made by people who had no idea they were creating the foundation of human literacy. They were just trying not to get fired for losing track of the grain inventory. The writing system they developed was called cuneiform, which sounds sophisticated until you realize it literally means wedge-shaped, because apparently even ancient civilizations weren't above stating the obvious. The tool of choice was a reed stylus, which was basically a stick with attitude. You pressed it into soft clay at various angles, creating combinations of wedges and lines that somehow represented words, ideas, and the growing frustration of scribes everywhere. The clay tablets were then left to dry, creating permanent records that were about as portable as a brick and twice as likely to break if you looked at them wrong. But here's the thing about those early scribes: they were the rock stars of their time. In a world where literacy rates hovered somewhere between abysmal and what's literacy? Being able to make meaningful marks on clay was like having supernatural powers. Kings needed them, merchants depended on them, and regular people regarded them with the same mixture of awe and suspicion usually reserved for people who could predict eclipses or survive eating questionable mushrooms. The scribes formed an elite class, which is ironic considering their job was essentially professional note-taking. But in a society where most people couldn't even write their own names, being able to document the price of barley was genuine wizardry. The training to become a scribe wasn't for the faint of heart. It started young, usually around age 7, when most children today are worried about losing teeth and whether the monster under their bed has dietary restrictions. These Mesopotamian kids were thrust into scribal schools called adubas, which roughly translates to tablet house, though house of endless repetition and sore fingers would have been more accurate. Students spent years learning hundreds of cuneiform signs, practicing on clay tablets until their hands cramped and their eyes crossed. They wrote the same words over and over, lists of gods, kings, animals, body parts, and probably a few creative curses directed at their instructors. The curriculum was brutal. Students had to memorize not just the symbols, but their various meanings, because cuneiform was delightfully inconsistent. The same symbol could represent a word, a syllable, or just be there for decoration, depending on context and the scribe's mood that day. It was like learning a language where every word could mean 17 different things. and the only way to figure out which meaning applied was through a combination of context, intuition, and prayer to whichever god handled educational frustration. And the mistakes. Oh, the beautiful eternal mistakes. Unlike pencil on paper, where errors could be erased, cuneiform mistakes were carved into clay for posterity. Every slip of the stylus, every moment of inattention, every time a student's mind wandered to thoughts of lunch or escape, it was all there in the clay, waiting to be discovered by archaeologists thousands of years later, who would chuckle at the ancient equivalent of, "The dog ate my homework." Some tablets have been found with practice, exercises that deteriorate into what can only be described as frustrated scribbling, suggesting that even ancient students occasionally reached their breaking point and decided that artistic expression was more important than accurate transcription. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, the ancient Egyptians were developing their own approach to the handwriting problem, and they decided that what the world really needed was a writing system that looked like a fever dream, illustrated by someone with an unhealthy obsession with animals and geometric shapes. They called it hieroglyphics, from the Greek words meaning sacred carvings, though the scribes doing the actual carving probably had less reverent names for it, most of which wouldn't be appropriate for family viewing even by ancient standards. Egyptian hieroglyphs were the Instagram of the ancient world. Everything had to look perfect, even if it took forever to create and conveyed relatively simple information. Need to write bread. Here's a detailed drawing of a loaf. Want to indicate bird. Choose from dozens of precisely rendered avian species, each representing different sounds or concepts. The Egyptians didn't just write, they curated their communication with the aesthetic sensibility of people who believed their words would be judged by gods with very particular artistic opinions. But carving intricate pictures into stone was time-consuming, even by ancient standards where time moved at the pace of oxen, and nobody was particularly worried about efficiency. So the Egyptians developed a shorthand version called hieratic, which was basically hieroglyphs having a nervous breakdown under deadline pressure. The beautiful, detailed pictures became hurried scribbles that maintained just enough resemblance to the original symbols that trained scribes could decipher them, though probably not without some educated guessing, and the occasional consultation with colleagues who might have better handwriting or superior pattern recognition skills. Egyptian scribes used reed pens and a substance called papyrus, which was made from the papyrus plant through a process that involved cutting, soaking, pressing, and drying, basically turning a marshweed into the ancient world's first paper. Papyrus was revolutionary. It was lighter than clay tablets, more portable than stone, and had the added advantage of not shattering into 1,000 pieces if you dropped it, though it did have an unfortunate tendency to crumble, fade, or get eaten by insects over time. Nothing gold can stay, as ancient scribes probably muttered while watching centuries of their work turn to dust. The ink was a mixture of carbon and gum, creating a black substance that had the consistency of determination and the permanence of regret. Unlike clay, where mistakes could sometimes be smoothed over if caught quickly, ink on papyrus was forever. This led to the development of careful, deliberate writing techniques and probably the first instances of writer's anxiety, as scribes realized that every stroke of their pen was a commitment that would outlast their natural lifespan and potentially embarrass their descendants for generations. Egyptian scribal schools were just as rigorous as their Mesopotamian counterparts, but with the added pressure of aesthetic perfection. Students didn't just have to learn symbols, they had to learn to make them beautiful. Hieroglyphs weren't just functional, they were art, and sloppy hieroglyphs were apparently worse than no hieroglyphs at all. Students practiced for years, creating the same symbols thousands of times, developing the muscle memory necessary to draw a perfect ibis or crocodile while probably never actually seeing these creatures in person. It was like learning to draw realistic portraits using only written descriptions. Except the consequences of getting it wrong might include disappointing the gods or having your work erased by a teacher with impossibly high standards. The Egyptians also developed the concept of professional copying, where scribes would reproduce important texts by hand. This was necessary for preserving knowledge, but it also led to the ancient world's first copy editors, people whose job was to check transcriptions for errors and maintain quality control over the written word. Imagine spending your entire career reading the same text over and over, looking for mistakes made by your colleagues, and you begin to understand why ancient Egyptian literature contains so many references to the afterlife. Some jobs make eternity look like a reasonable career move. As civilizations developed and trade expanded, the need for simpler, more efficient writing systems became apparent. The Phoenicians, who were basically the ancient world's traveling salesmen, needed a way to communicate that didn't require years of training or the ability to recognize hundreds of different symbols. Their solution was revolutionary in its simplicity and alphabet. Instead of symbols representing words or concepts, they created a small set of symbols that represented sounds, which could be combined to form any word in their language. This was the writing equivalent of discovering that you could build anything with a basic set of tools, instead of needing a different specialized instrument for every possible task. The Phoenician alphabet contained only 22 letters, which meant that literacy became accessible to ordinary people who had neither the time nor the inclination to spend decades learning complex symbol systems. Merchants could learn to write in months instead of years. Children could master the basics without dedicating their entire childhood to penmanship, and suddenly writing wasn't the exclusive domain of professional scribes and religious authorities. The Greeks adopted and adapted the Phoenician system, adding vowels because apparently they felt that consonant-only writing left too much to the imagination. This innovation made Greek writing more precise and easier to read, though it also meant that Greek students had more letters to learn and more opportunities for spelling mistakes. The Greeks wrote on various materials: papyrus when they could afford it, wooden tablets coated with wax for everyday use, and pottery shards called ostraca when they needed something disposable, or when they were voting to exile someone from the city, which gives new meaning to the phrase, throwing stones in glass houses. Greek handwriting varied considerably depending on the writer's education, purpose, and probably their mood on any given day. Formal inscriptions on stone were carefully planned and executed, with letters that were geometric perfection made manifest. But everyday writing, the kind found on personal letters and business documents, was much more casual, with letters that flowed together and shortcuts that prioritized speed over beauty. This created a distinction that still exists today between formal, careful writing and the hurried scrawl most people use for grocery lists and phone messages. The Romans, never ones to leave well enough alone, took the Greek alphabet and modified it further, creating the system that would eventually evolve into the letters you're reading right now. Roman letters were designed with practical considerations in mind. They needed to be easily carved into stone, painted on walls, and written quickly on papyrus or wax tablets. The result was a set of letters that were both elegant and functional, which is probably the best description of Roman civilization in general. Roman scribes used a variety of tools depending on their task and budget. For formal documents and important inscriptions, they used carefully prepared parchment, which was made from animal skins that had been cleaned, stretched, and treated until they became smooth writing surfaces. The process of making parchment was time-consuming and expensive, requiring skilled craftsmen and several dead animals, which meant that parchment was reserved for documents that needed to be permanent and impressive. For everyday use, Romans wrote on wax tablets, which consisted of wooden boards with raised edges filled with a layer of wax. These could be written on with a stylus, erased by smoothing the wax, and reused indefinitely, making them the ancient equivalent of a whiteboard or notepad. Students used wax tablets for their lessons. Merchants used them for temporary records, and lovers probably used them for messages that were meant to be romantic, but often ended up being accidentally erased by fumbling fingers or inopportune weather. The stylus was typically made of metal, bone, or wood, with one pointed end for writing and one flat end for erasing. This dual-purpose design was both practical and symbolic. Every writer carried within the tools for both creation and destruction. The ability to make marks and unmake them, to commit thoughts to physical form and then reconsider their choices. The stylus was the writer's sword and shield. their means of engaging with the world through marks and symbols that could convey everything from love letters to tax records to philosophical treatises on the nature of existence. Roman handwriting styles developed along class lines, as most things did in Roman society. Educated citizens learned formal scripts that were used for official documents and literary works, while ordinary people developed more casual styles that prioritized speed and practicality over beauty. The wealthy could afford to hire professional scribes whose handwriting was flawless, while everyone else made do with their own abilities and hoped that their correspondents could decipher their intentions from context and charitable interpretation. But Roman scribes faced unique challenges that their predecessors hadn't encountered. The Roman Empire was vast, stretching from Britain to North Africa, from Spain to Mesopotamia, and communication across such distances required writing that could survive long journeys, harsh climates, and the general chaos of ancient transportation. Letters had to be written on durable materials, sealed properly, and entrusted to messengers who might or might not deliver them intact, if at all. This led to the development of more standardized writing practices and formats. Roman letters followed conventional structures, with specific phrases for openings and closings, formal language for official correspondence, and established protocols for addressing people of different social ranks. Writing became not just a matter of recording information, but of navigating complex social hierarchies and political relationships through carefully chosen words and appropriately respectful penmanship. As the Roman Empire declined and fell, much of the classical knowledge of writing and literacy was preserved in monasteries, where Christian monks dedicated their lives to copying and preserving texts. This period, often called the Dark Ages, was actually a time of intense literary activity, though it was concentrated in religious institutions rather than being widely distributed throughout society. Monks developed new writing styles and techniques while working in scriptoriums, large rooms where dozens of scribes worked simultaneously, creating an atmosphere that was part library, part workshop, and part meditation center. Medieval scribes faced challenges that would make modern writers grateful for their keyboards and delete buttons. They worked by candlelight or dim natural light, hunched over wooden desks for hours at a time, copying text letter by letter without the benefit of dictionaries, spell check, or easy correction methods. Mistakes were costly. A single error might require scraping away ink with a knife, rewriting entire sections, or starting over completely on expensive parchment that represented weeks of preparation and significant financial investment. The tools of medieval writing were specialized and expensive. Quill pens were made from bird feathers, typically goose or swan, that had to be carefully prepared by cutting the tip at a precise angle and creating a slit that would hold ink and release it smoothly. The process of making a proper quill pen was an art form in itself, requiring skill, patience, and probably a certain amount of trial and error that resulted in ruined feathers and frustrated scribes. Ink was made from various recipes that often sounded more like witchcraft than chemistry. Iron gall ink, the most common type, was created by combining iron sulfate with tannic acid extracted from oak galls, small growths on oak trees caused by wasp larvae. The resulting ink was permanent and dark, but also corrosive, meaning that over time it would actually eat through the parchment it was written on. Medieval scribes were literally writing their way through their writing material, creating texts that would preserve knowledge while simultaneously destroying the medium that contained it. Parchment preparation was equally complex and time-consuming. Animal skins had to be soaked in lime to remove hair, stretched on frames, scraped smooth, and treated with various substances to create a suitable writing surface. The best parchment was made from young animals and was so smooth and white that it seemed almost luminous. Cheaper varieties were rougher and yellower, but still represented a significant investment of time, effort, and resources. Medieval handwriting styles evolved to meet the specific needs of manuscript production. Gothic script, which dominated European writing for several centuries, was designed to maximize the amount of text that could fit on a page while maintaining readability. The letters were tall, narrow, and closely spaced, creating pages that looked like beautiful but dense forests of vertical strokes. Reading Gothic script required trained eyes and considerable patience, but it allowed scribes to fit more words on expensive parchment, making books smaller and more affordable, though affordable, in medieval terms, still meant expensive enough that most people would never own one. The work of copying manuscripts was incredibly slow and labor-intensive. A single book might take months or years to complete, depending on its length and complexity. Scribes worked in shifts, with different people responsible for different aspects of the process. Some wrote the text, others added decorative initials, still others created elaborate illustrations or marginalia. The most skilled scribes specialized in specific types of work, such as copying liturgical texts, creating illuminated manuscripts, or reproducing classical works that required knowledge of Latin, Greek, or other languages. The physical demands of medieval writing were significant. Scribes developed repetitive stress injuries from hours of hunched posture and repetitive hand movements. Their eyes strained from working in poor light, their backs ached from bending over desks, and their hands cramped from gripping quill pens for extended periods. Many scribes left marginal notes in their manuscripts complaining about their working conditions, the weather, their hunger, or their general dissatisfaction with their chosen profession. These complaints provide modern readers with glimpses into the human experience of medieval writing, reminding us that even the most beautiful manuscripts were created by people who sometimes wished they were doing something else. But medieval scribes also took pride in their work and found ways to express creativity within the constraints of their profession. Illuminated manuscripts featured elaborate decorations, intricate borders, and detailed illustrations that transformed functional texts into works of art. Scribes developed distinctive handwriting styles that became recognizable to scholars, leaving signatures in their penmanship that allowed their work to be identified centuries later. Some scribes included personal touches in their manuscripts, jokes, observations, drawings, or coded messages that revealed their personalities and provided relief from the monotony of copying religious or classical texts. The medieval period also saw the development of new writing materials and techniques. Paper, which had been invented in China centuries earlier, gradually made its way to Europe through Islamic traders and scholars. Paper was cheaper than parchment and easier to produce, though early European paper was often of poor quality and less durable than the parchment it was intended to replace. The transition from parchment to paper was gradual and uneven, with different regions and institutions adopting paper at different rates depending on their needs, resources, and conservative resistance to change. The arrival of paper in Europe coincided with increasing demand for written materials as trade expanded. Universities were established and literacy slowly spread beyond the clergy and nobility. More books meant more copying, which meant more scribes working longer hours to meet demand. The limitations of hand copying became increasingly apparent as European society became more complex and interconnected. The solution came in the form of movable type printing, invented by Johannes Gutenberg in the mid-15th century. Gutenberg's printing press represented a revolution in the production of written materials, but it also marked the beginning of the end for professional scribes. Suddenly, books could be produced quickly and cheaply, making written materials accessible to a much broader audience than ever before. The age of handwritten books was coming to an end, though handwriting itself was far from obsolete. Actually, let's pause here for a moment to appreciate the irony of Gutenberg's situation. Here was a man who spent years perfecting a technology that would make handwriting professionally obsolete, and yet he had to use handwriting to design his type, plan his printing process, and conduct the business correspondence necessary to finance and market his invention. Gutenberg was essentially handwriting his way out of the handwriting business, which seems like the kind of paradox that would have amused philosophers if they hadn't been too busy worrying about whether printing would destroy human memory and make people intellectually lazy. The printing press didn't eliminate handwriting, it changed its function and social significance. Before printing, handwriting was the only way to reproduce text, making scribes essential for preserving and spreading knowledge. After printing, handwriting became more personal and immediate, used for letters, notes, records, and other communications that didn't require the formality and permanence of printed text. The Renaissance brought new attitudes toward handwriting and personal expression. Humanist scholars developed new writing styles that were cleaner and more readable than Gothic script, emphasizing clarity and elegance over space efficiency. Italian humanist script became the foundation for what we now call italic handwriting, characterized by slanted letters and flowing connections between characters. Renaissance writing masters established schools and published instructional books on penmanship, turning handwriting from a craft learned through apprenticeship into a formal subject with standardized techniques and aesthetic principles. These writing masters were part teacher, part artist, and part showman, demonstrating elaborate flourishes and decorative techniques that transformed utilitarian writing into performance art. The tools of Renaissance writing reflected the period's emphasis on artistic achievement and personal refinement. Quill pens were cut with increasing precision and sophistication, creating instruments capable of producing fine lines, broad strokes, and delicate variations in thickness. Ink recipes became more refined, producing colors that were deeper, more stable, and less likely to fade or damage the writing surface. Renaissance writers also had access to better paper. As European papermaking techniques improved and production expanded, paper mills were established throughout Europe, producing paper of various qualities and prices to meet different needs and budgets. The availability of good, affordable paper encouraged more people to write, leading to an explosion in personal correspondence, business records, and literary production. But Renaissance handwriting wasn't just about functionality, it was about identity and social status. Educated people were expected to write beautifully, and handwriting became a marker of refinement, education, and cultural sophistication. Poor handwriting could damage one's reputation and social prospects, while elegant penmanship opened doors and created opportunities. This led to the development of elaborate writing styles that prioritized appearance over speed or practicality, creating documents that were beautiful to look at, but often difficult to read quickly. The emphasis on beautiful handwriting also created new forms of inequality and exclusion. People who couldn't afford formal education, or who worked with their hands, might never develop the refined penmanship that was increasingly expected in polite society. Handwriting became another way to distinguish between social classes, with elaborate scripts serving as markers of privilege and leisure time that ordinary people couldn't access or replicate. As European society became more commercial and bureaucratic, the demand for clear, legible handwriting increased. Merchants needed to keep accurate records. Governments required documentation for tax collection and legal proceedings, and the growing middle class wanted to participate in the written culture that had previously been restricted to the nobility and clergy. This practical need for functional handwriting led to the development of new teaching methods and writing styles that emphasized speed and clarity over artistic beauty. Round hand, copperplate, and other business scripts were designed to be learned quickly, written rapidly, and read easily, even by people who weren't trained in the intricacies of formal penmanship. The 18th century saw the rise of writing masters who specialized in teaching practical handwriting skills to merchants, clerks, and other working people who needed to write as part of their jobs. These teachers developed systematic approaches to handwriting instruction, breaking down letter formation into component strokes and practicing exercises that would develop the muscle memory necessary for fluent writing. But the 18th century also saw the beginning of the end for traditional writing tools and techniques. Steel pen nibs, invented in the early 1800s, gradually replaced quill pens for many writing tasks. Steel nibs were more durable, more consistent, and didn't require the skill and time necessary to prepare and maintain quill pens. They could be mass-produced and sold cheaply, making good writing tools accessible to a much broader population than ever before. The Industrial Revolution transformed every aspect of writing, from the tools used to create text to the materials it was written on to the social and economic contexts in which writing took place. Factories could produce paper, pens, and ink more cheaply and consistently than traditional craftsmen, while improved transportation systems made these materials available in remote areas that had previously been isolated from centers of learning and commerce. Mass education systems, established throughout Europe and North America during the 19th century, created unprecedented demand for standardized handwriting instruction. Millions of children needed to learn to write, and their teachers needed systematic methods for providing that instruction efficiently and effectively. This led to the development of copybook systems, where students practiced handwriting by copying examples of perfect letters and words until they could reproduce them automatically. The Palmer method, developed by Austin Palmer in the late 19th century, became the dominant handwriting system in American schools. Palmer emphasized smooth, flowing movements that could be executed quickly without causing fatigue or repetitive stress injuries. The Palmer method was designed for efficiency rather than beauty, reflecting the industrial age's emphasis on productivity and standardization. Palmer method instruction was rigorous and systematic, requiring students to practice basic strokes for hours before moving on to letters, then words, then sentences. Students learned to write with their whole arm rather than just their fingers, developing the large muscle movements that Palmer believed were essential for fluent, sustainable handwriting. The goal was to produce graduates who could write quickly, legibly, and for extended periods without discomfort or loss of quality. But the Palmer method and similar systems also reflected changing attitudes toward individuality and personal expression. Earlier handwriting instruction had emphasized developing a personal style within established conventions, but industrial age penmanship focused on conformity and standardization. Students were expected to produce handwriting that looked essentially identical, regardless of their personal preferences or natural tendencies. This standardization served practical purposes in an increasingly complex commercial society where clerks, bookkeepers, and other office workers needed to produce documents that could be read easily by anyone, regardless of who had written them. Personal style in handwriting was seen as a form of inefficiency that interfered with clear communication and smooth business operations. The early 20th century brought new challenges to traditional handwriting as typewriters became more common and affordable. Suddenly, it was possible to produce text that was perfectly legible, uniform, and professional, looking without years of penmanship training. Typing was faster than handwriting for most people, produced more consistent results, and didn't cause the hand cramps and writer's fatigue that plagued even skilled penmen. But handwriting advocates argued that there were benefits to writing by hand that couldn't be replicated by mechanical devices. Handwriting was more flexible, allowing for corrections, additions, and personal touches that typewriters couldn't accommodate. Handwritten documents were also more personal and intimate, carrying traces of the writer's personality and emotional state that mechanical text couldn't convey. The debate between handwriting and typing reflected broader cultural tensions between tradition and modernity, personal expression and mechanical efficiency, human craftsmanship and industrial production. These tensions would only intensify as new technologies continued to challenge the role of handwriting in daily life. The development of the fountain pen in the late 19th century represented both the culmination of traditional writing technology and the beginning of its decline. Fountain pens eliminated the need for separate inkwells and the constant dipping that had characterized pen and ink writing for centuries. They provided a steady flow of ink, consistent line quality, and the convenience of portability that made writing possible anywhere, anytime. Early fountain pens were expensive and sometimes unreliable, prone to leaking, clogging, or producing uneven ink flow. But improvements in design and manufacturing gradually made fountain pens more affordable and dependable, leading to widespread adoption among professionals, students, and anyone else who needed to write regularly. The fountain pen represented the perfect marriage of traditional handwriting aesthetics with modern convenience and reliability. A good fountain pen could produce beautiful handwriting with minimal effort, responding to variations in pressure and angle to create lines that varied in thickness and character. Fountain pens encouraged good handwriting technique while making the physical act of writing more comfortable and sustainable. But fountain pens also required care and maintenance that many people found burdensome. They needed to be cleaned regularly, refilled with ink, and handled carefully to prevent damage. The ink was permanent but also prone to smudging if the writer wasn't careful, and fountain pens didn't work well on all types of paper or in all weather conditions. The ballpoint pen, invented in the 1930s but not widely available until after World War II, solved most of the practical problems associated with fountain pens while creating new ones. Ballpoint pens were reliable, convenient, and virtually maintenance-free, but they also produced handwriting that many people found less satisfying and less beautiful than fountain pen writing. Ballpoint pens required more pressure to write, leading to a heavier, less nuanced writing style that emphasized consistency over expressiveness. The ink was less varied in its appearance, creating lines that were uniform in thickness and color regardless of the writer's technique or intentions. For many people, ballpoint pens made handwriting feel more mechanical and less personal, even as they made it more convenient and accessible. The rise of ballpoint pens coincided with broader changes in education and society that reduced the emphasis on beautiful handwriting. As typing became more common and important, schools began spending less time on penmanship instruction, focusing instead on teaching students to keyboard efficiently and accurately. Handwriting was still taught, but it was no longer considered the essential life skill it had been for previous generations. The introduction of computers and word processing software in the 1980s and 1990s accelerated the decline of handwriting for many purposes. Suddenly, it was possible to produce professional-looking documents quickly and easily, with perfect spelling, consistent formatting, and the ability to edit and revise without starting over. For business correspondence, academic writing, and many other purposes, computer-generated text became the standard, relegating handwriting to personal notes, greeting cards, and other informal uses. But the digital revolution also created new appreciation for handwriting as a form of personal expression and human connection. In a world increasingly dominated by standardized digital text, handwritten notes and letters became more special and meaningful, carrying emotional weight that typed text couldn't match. People began to rediscover the pleasure of writing by hand, the satisfying feel of pen on paper, and the intimate connection between thought, hand, and written word. The early 21st century saw a renaissance of interest in handwriting and traditional writing tools. Fountain pen sales increased as people sought alternatives to disposable ballpoint pens and digital devices. Calligraphy classes became popular hobbies, and stationery stores experienced renewed interest in high-quality papers, inks, and writing instruments. This handwriting revival was partly nostalgic, representing a desire to connect with pre-digital traditions and skills that seemed in danger of disappearing. But it was also practical, as research suggested that handwriting offered cognitive and educational benefits that typing couldn't provide. Studies indicated that taking notes by hand improved comprehension and retention compared to typing, and that learning to write by hand helped children develop reading skills and fine motor coordination. The physical act of forming letters by hand seemed to engage different parts of the brain than typing, creating stronger connections between visual, motor, and cognitive processes. This suggested that handwriting wasn't just a quaint anachronism, but an important tool for learning, thinking, and memory that complemented rather than competed with digital technologies. Educational systems began to reconsider their approaches to handwriting instruction, recognizing that even in a digital age, the ability to write by hand remained valuable. Some schools reinstated formal penmanship programs, while others integrated handwriting practice with other subjects, using the act of writing to reinforce learning in math, science, and language arts. The tools available to contemporary writers represent the culmination of thousands of years of technological development and artistic refinement. Modern fountain pens combine traditional craftsmanship with advanced materials and manufacturing techniques, producing instruments that are more reliable, durable, and beautiful than their historical predecessors. High-quality paper is available in varieties that would have amazed medieval scribes, with surfaces designed specifically for different types of writing and artistic applications. Modern inks offer colors and properties that early writers could never have imagined. Inks that change color, disappear over time, or resist fading and water damage. Ballpoint and gel pens provide convenience and reliability, while incorporating design innovations that improve comfort, control, and writing quality. Digital styluses allow handwriting on tablets and smartphones, bridging the gap between traditional handwriting and modern technology. But perhaps the most significant development in contemporary handwriting is the recognition that it serves purposes beyond mere communication. Handwriting has become a form of meditation, artistic expression, and personal connection that offers unique benefits in an increasingly digital world. The choice to write by hand is now a deliberate one, made not from necessity but from preference, representing a conscious decision to slow down, engage more deeply with thoughts and words, and create something uniquely personal and human. The future of handwriting remains uncertain but promising, as artificial intelligence and voice recognition technology make it possible to generate text without typing or writing. The act of putting pen to paper becomes even more distinctly human and valuable. Handwriting may never again be the primary method of creating text, but its role as a tool for thinking, learning, and personal expression seems secure. The long journey from Sumerian clay tablets to modern fountain pens represents one of humanity's most important technological and cultural developments. Each generation of writers faced unique challenges and opportunities, developing tools and techniques that reflected their needs, values, and aesthetic preferences. The history of handwriting is ultimately the history of human communication itself, our endless quest to externalize our thoughts, preserve our knowledge, and connect with each other across time and space. From the first tentative marks pressed into soft clay by ancient accountants to the flowing scripts of Renaissance masters to the standardized penmanship of industrial-age students, handwriting has been shaped by practical necessity, artistic ambition, social expectations, and technological possibility. Each era has left its mark on the development of writing, contributing innovations that have made handwriting more accessible, efficient, beautiful, or expressive. The tools of handwriting tell a parallel story of human ingenuity and adaptation. Reed styluses, quill pens, steel nibs, fountain pens, and ballpoints each represented solutions to specific problems and opportunities, reflecting the materials, manufacturing capabilities, and priorities of their times. The evolution of writing instruments shows how technology develops through incremental improvements and occasional breakthrough innovations, with each generation building on the achievements of its predecessors while addressing their limitations and shortcomings. Perhaps most remarkably, the basic human impulse to make meaningful marks has remained constant throughout this long history. Whether pressing symbols into clay, scratching letters onto wax tablets, or flowing ink across paper, writers have been motivated by the same fundamental desires to record, communicate, create, and leave traces of their existence for others to discover. The specific techniques and tools have changed dramatically, but the essential human relationship with written expression has remained remarkably consistent. The democratization of handwriting over the centuries represents one of humanity's great achievements. What began as an elite skill practiced by a small class of professional scribes gradually became accessible to broader populations, eventually reaching the point where basic literacy was considered a fundamental human right rather than a privilege of birth or wealth. This transformation required countless innovations in tools, materials, teaching methods, and social organization, but it fundamentally changed human civilization by making written communication available to anyone willing to learn. The social and cultural functions of handwriting have evolved along with its tools and techniques. Medieval scribes preserved classical knowledge and religious texts. Renaissance humanists used elegant handwriting to demonstrate refinement and education. Industrial-age clerks employed standardized scripts to facilitate commerce and administration, and contemporary writers choose handwriting as a form of personal expression and mindful practice. Each of these functions required different skills, tools, and approaches, demonstrating handwriting's remarkable adaptability to changing human needs and circumstances. The ability of handwriting to serve simultaneously as practical communication tool, artistic medium, educational technique, and personal practice helps explain its persistence despite repeated predictions of its obsolescence. The relationship between handwriting and identity has remained particularly strong throughout history. Medieval scribes could be identified by their distinctive hands. Renaissance writing masters built reputations on their calligraphic skills, and even today, handwriting analysis is used to authenticate documents and assess personality traits. The marks we make on paper carry traces of our individuality that no other form of text production can replicate, creating a physical manifestation of our thoughts and personality that connects us directly with our readers. This connection between handwriting and identity has made the teaching and learning of handwriting about more than just functional communication skills. Handwriting instruction has traditionally been seen as character formation, discipline training, and cultural transmission, helping students develop patience, attention to detail, and respect for tradition while acquiring practical skills they would need throughout their lives. The physical demands of handwriting have shaped not only the tools and techniques used by writers, but also the social and economic structures surrounding written communication. The time and effort required to produce handwritten text made literacy valuable and scribes powerful, creating educational institutions, professional guilds, and cultural hierarchies that persisted for centuries. The gradual reduction in these physical demands through technological innovation helped democratize literacy while changing the social significance of writing skills. The aesthetic dimensions of handwriting have provided continuous opportunities for artistic expression and cultural distinction. From the elaborate illuminations of medieval manuscripts to the flowing flourishes of 18th century writing masters to the clean minimalism of modern design, conscious penmanship, handwriting has served as a canvas for artistic creativity within functional constraints. This tension between utility and beauty has driven many innovations in handwriting technique and tool design, as writers have sought ways to make their practical communication more visually appealing and personally expressive. The preservation of handwritten documents has created an invaluable historical record that provides insights not only into what people thought and did, but how they lived, worked, and expressed themselves. Archaeological discoveries of ancient tablets, surviving medieval manuscripts, and archives of personal correspondence offer windows into past cultures that no other sources can provide. The physical characteristics of handwritten documents, the materials used, the quality of execution, the evidence of corrections and revisions, tell stories about their creators' circumstances, priorities, and capabilities that printed or digital text cannot convey. Modern forensic analysis of historical handwriting has revealed information about authorship, dating, and authenticity that has revolutionized our understanding of literature, history, and culture. The ability to identify individual hands, trace the development of writing styles, and analyze the physical evidence embedded in handwritten documents has made handwriting a valuable tool for historians, literary scholars, and criminal investigators. But perhaps the most important legacy of handwriting's long history is its demonstration of human adaptability and creativity in the face of practical challenges. Every generation of writers has found ways to improve upon inherited techniques and tools, developing solutions that reflected their particular needs and resources while building toward future innovations. The story of handwriting shows how practical necessity drives technological development, but also how human aesthetic sensibility and desire for personal expression shape that development in unpredictable directions. The current revival of interest in handwriting and traditional writing tools suggests that even in an age of digital ubiquity, there remains something irreplaceably valuable about the direct, physical connection between hand, pen, and paper. The slower pace of handwriting, the commitment required by its irreversibility, the personal character it carries, and the sensory satisfaction it provides continue to attract people who find these qualities missing from their digital interactions. Educational research supporting the cognitive benefits of handwriting has provided scientific validation for what writers have long known intuitively, that there is something different about writing by hand that engages the mind in ways that other forms of text production cannot match. The physical act of forming letters activates neural pathways associated with learning, memory, and creativity, suggesting that handwriting serves functions beyond mere communication that make it valuable even when more efficient alternatives are available. The global nature of contemporary culture has also created new opportunities for handwriting to serve as a bridge between different writing traditions and aesthetic sensibilities. Calligraphy traditions from East Asia, the Middle East, and Europe are now accessible to writers everywhere, creating hybrid approaches that combine techniques and influences from multiple cultural sources. This cross-pollination has enriched contemporary handwriting practice while preserving traditional knowledge that might otherwise be lost. The environmental consciousness of contemporary culture has added another dimension to handwriting's appeal. As people seek alternatives to the electronic devices and digital infrastructure that require significant energy and material resources to produce and maintain, a good pen and paper represent a more sustainable approach to text creation that can last for decades with minimal environmental impact, making handwriting attractive to people concerned about their ecological footprint. The tactile qualities of handwriting provide sensory experiences that digital alternatives cannot replicate. The feel of different papers, the flow of various inks, the weight and balance of well-made writing instruments, and the visual feedback of letters appearing on the page create a multi-sensory experience that many people find more satisfying and engaging than typing on keyboards or touchscreens. This sensory richness may help explain why handwriting continues to attract practitioners, despite its relative inefficiency compared to digital alternatives. The social aspects of handwriting have also evolved to meet contemporary needs and preferences. Handwritten letters and notes carry emotional weight and personal significance that digital messages often lack, making them particularly valued for important occasions, intimate communications, and expressions of care or sympathy. The time and effort required to write by hand signals commitment and thoughtfulness that recipients interpret as evidence of the writer's sincerity and regard. Contemporary handwriting communities, both online and in person, provide social support and shared learning opportunities for people interested in developing their penmanship skills. These communities share techniques, recommend tools and materials, showcase exemplary work, and preserve knowledge about traditional practices that might otherwise disappear. The social dimension of handwriting practice helps sustain interest and motivation while creating connections between people who share appreciation for this ancient art and craft. The therapeutic aspects of handwriting have gained recognition as people seek mindful practices that provide respite from the rapid pace and constant connectivity of contemporary life. The focused attention required for careful handwriting, the rhythmic movements involved in letter formation, and the immediate feedback provided by the appearance of text on paper create a meditative experience that many people find calming and restorative. Handwriting practice has become a form of analog mindfulness that complements digital meditation apps and other contemporary wellness practices. The future of handwriting will likely be shaped by its ability to adapt to changing technological and cultural contexts while maintaining the essential qualities that make it uniquely valuable. As artificial intelligence becomes capable of generating human-like text automatically, the deliberate choice to write by hand becomes even more distinctly human and meaningful. The imperfections, variations, and personal characteristics of handwritten text may become increasingly precious as machine-generated content becomes indistinguishable from human writing in many contexts. Educational systems will continue to grapple with questions about how much time and effort to devote to handwriting instruction in curricula already crowded with digital literacy requirements and other contemporary skills. The challenge will be finding approaches that preserve the cognitive and cultural benefits of handwriting while acknowledging the practical realities of a world where most text creation happens through keyboards, touchscreens, and voice recognition systems. The development of new tools and materials will likely continue, driven by the enthusiasm of contemporary handwriting practitioners and the commercial opportunities created by the handwriting revival. Innovations in pen design, ink chemistry, paper manufacturing, and hybrid analog, digital writing systems will provide new options for writers while building on centuries of accumulated knowledge about what makes writing tools effective, durable, and pleasant to use. The preservation and study of historical handwriting will benefit from advancing digital technologies that can analyze, catalog, and make accessible the vast archives of handwritten documents held by libraries, museums, and private collections around the world. Digital tools will make it possible to study handwriting patterns across large datasets, compare writing samples from different periods and regions, and preserve fragile documents while making them available to researchers and the general public. International efforts to preserve traditional handwriting knowledge and techniques will help ensure that cultural heritage associated with writing practices from different regions and historical periods remains accessible to future generations. These efforts will require collaboration between educational institutions, cultural organizations, and handwriting communities to document, teach, and practice traditional techniques that might otherwise be lost as older practitioners retire or pass away without transmitting their knowledge. The environmental sustainability of handwriting practices will likely receive increased attention as concerns about climate change and resource consumption influence consumer choices and educational policies. Sustainable approaches to paper production, ink manufacturing, and pen construction will become more important to environmentally conscious writers, while the longevity and repairability of quality writing instruments will become selling points that distinguish premium products from disposable alternatives. The integration of handwriting with digital technologies will continue to evolve as stylus-based input systems become more sophisticated and responsive. Digital writing tablets that can capture the nuances of pressure, speed, and angle variations in handwriting while providing the convenience of digital storage and transmission represent promising hybrid approaches that may bridge traditional and contemporary writing practices. The scientific study of handwriting's cognitive and educational benefits will likely expand as neuroscience and educational psychology develop more sophisticated methods for measuring the effects of different writing practices on learning, memory, and creativity. This research will provide evidence-based guidance for educational policy and individual practice, while deepening our understanding of how physical writing activities relate to mental processes. The story of handwriting from clay tablets to fountain pens represents a remarkable journey of human ingenuity, adaptability, and persistence. Across millennia and cultures, people have found ways to externalize their thoughts, preserve their knowledge, and communicate with others through marks made by hand. The specific tools, techniques, and purposes have evolved dramatically, but the fundamental human relationship with handwritten expression has remained remarkably consistent. Each stage in this evolution has built upon previous achievements while addressing new challenges and opportunities. Sumerian clay tablets solved the problem of record keeping, Egyptian papyrus made writing portable, alphabetic systems made literacy accessible, medieval manuscripts preserved classical knowledge, Renaissance penmanship elevated writing to an art form, industrial age methods standardized instruction, and contemporary practice has rediscovered handwriting's value for personal expression and cognitive development. The democratization of handwriting over the centuries represents one of humanity's great cultural achievements, transforming an elite skill into a basic capability that billions of people now take for granted. This transformation required countless innovations in materials, tools, manufacturing, and education, but it fundamentally changed human civilization by making written communication accessible to anyone willing to learn. The persistence of handwriting, despite repeated predictions of its obsolescence, demonstrates the enduring value of direct, physical engagement with the written word. Even as digital technologies provide increasingly sophisticated alternatives, people continue to find unique benefits in the slow, deliberate, sensory, rich experience of writing by hand. This suggests that handwriting serves human needs that go beyond mere efficiency or convenience, touching on fundamental aspects of how we think, learn, create, and connect with others. The future of handwriting will likely be shaped by its ability to complement rather than compete with digital technologies, serving specialized functions that other forms of text creation cannot provide. As a tool for learning, thinking, artistic expression, and personal connection, handwriting seems likely to persist as long as humans value these activities and find satisfaction in the physical act of making meaningful marks on paper. The long history of handwriting reminds us that technological change, while often dramatic and disruptive, rarely completely eliminates valuable human practices. Instead, changing technologies typically transform the contexts and purposes for which traditional practices are used, sometimes reducing their prominence but often revealing new sources of value that keep them alive in modified forms. In the case of handwriting, this transformation has elevated it from a necessary skill to a chosen practice, from a professional requirement to a personal preference, from a standardized capability to an individual expression. This evolution may represent the ultimate vindication of handwriting's importance. Only when we no longer need to write by hand do we fully appreciate what we gain when we choose to do so. The journey from ancient styluses to modern fountain pens illustrates humanity's remarkable ability to refine and perfect practical tools over extended periods of time. Each generation of writers has found ways to make handwriting easier, more efficient, more beautiful, or more expressive, creating a cumulative tradition of innovation that spans thousands of years and countless individual contributions. This tradition continues today as contemporary pen makers, paper manufacturers, ink chemists, and handwriting enthusiasts work to preserve, improve, and adapt traditional writing tools and techniques for modern use. Their efforts ensure that the accumulated wisdom of centuries of handwriting practice remains available to anyone who wants to participate in this ancient but ever-evolving human activity. The story of handwriting is ultimately a story about the human desire to communicate, create, and leave lasting traces of our existence. From the first accountant pressing marks into clay to record grain deliveries, to the modern writer choosing a fountain pen for its aesthetic and tactile pleasures, the motivation remains essentially the same: to externalize thought, preserve knowledge, and connect with others through the simple but profound act of making marks that carry meaning. In an age when artificial intelligence can generate text, voice recognition can transcribe speech, and keyboards can produce perfect letters at the speed of thought, the choice to write by hand becomes a statement about what we value in the act of communication itself. It suggests that efficiency and perfection are not always our highest priorities, that sometimes the journey matters more than the destination, and that there remains something irreplaceably human about the slow, imperfect, but deeply personal process of forming letters one at a time with our own hands. The clay tablets of ancient Mesopotamia and the fountain pens of today may seem to have little in common, separated as they are by thousands of years and countless innovations. But they are connected by an unbroken chain of human creativity, practical problem solving, and the persistent desire to make meaning through marks. That continuity suggests that handwriting, in whatever form it takes, will continue to evolve and adapt as long as humans value the unique experience it provides and the distinctive benefits it offers. The future may bring writing tools and techniques we can barely imagine today, just as fountain pens would have seemed magical to ancient scribes struggling with reeds, styluses, and clay tablets. But whatever forms handwriting takes in the future, it will likely retain the essential characteristics that have made it valuable throughout its long history: the direct connection between thought and mark, the personal character that reflects individual identity, and the physical engagement that connects mind and body in the act of creation. The story of handwriting from clay tablets to fountain pens is far from over. It continues every time someone picks up a pen, forms a letter, and participates in the ancient human tradition of making meaning through marks. In doing so, they join a community that spans centuries and cultures, united by the simple but profound act of writing by hand.